amazing fading here. Yeah, welcome back. So as you have figured by now already, today is very panel intensive. We actually have just one speaker remaining, and beyond that we'll do panels up until tonight. Now we have a panel which is probably more interesting for you if you're actual users and maybe not like founders, builders, whatever, but also for them. So it's a bit more user-centric, I would say. So please come on stage. We have amazing panelists here, so a big round of applause for them, and then just please appear up here. Is the Schalter on?
Yes, now it's working. Thank you very much. Alrighty, so let's get organized. Yeah, how regulation is shifting DeFi for protocols and users. That's our topic today, and I very much appreciate like a great group of panelists here, and would like to invite you to briefly introduce yourself. Ladies first, Joanna.
Right. My name is Joanna. I work as the head of legal at Trilitech Limited. Trilitech is a research and development hub that builds the Tezos protocol.
All right. Chris?
Hi, hello. My name is Chris Payne. I'm a US lawyer living and working in Berlin, currently chief legal officer for a crypto startup that asks not to be named, as well as doing private advisory for clients throughout the EU.
Marius.
Hi, my name is Marius. I'm a partner and managing director of FinPlanet. FinPlanet is a Munich-based DLT consulting boutique, and we're focusing on building up DLT-based business models for asset managers, banks, and also fintechs.
Okay, last but not least, Peter.
Yeah, hi, I'm Peter. I'm CTO and co-founder at Unstoppable Finance and Iron. Yeah, so we have the plan to bring DeFi to the masses, and did this with a bunch of products. We built a wallet that we sold to a decentralized exchange recently, and currently focusing on building infrastructure to enable institutions to use stablecoins. Before I did that, I was a co-founder at Solaris Bank and built up Börse Stuttgart Digital Exchange.
Thank you very much. You know, hearing selling a unhosted wallet to a decentralized exchange immediately raises questions, but let's not start with that. We're coming back to that. I'm not sure who of you followed today that there was a hearing again in the US on DeFi, and specifically Rebecca Reddick testified in this hearing, and she said, you know, we cannot perfectly map TradFi laws onto intermediary-less systems. I think that is a correct statement to be made, and also acknowledged by MiCAR, our European crypto asset regulation, at least by saying in the recitals that crypto asset service provided in a fully decentralized manner without intermediaries are out of scope. That's clear so far, right? But then Rebecca proposes to regulate DeFi as critical digital infrastructure. And yeah, we actually had a bit of a discussion about this idea beforehand, and maybe, Joanna, you want to share some of your thoughts?
Yes, happy to, and then I can obviously also pass over the mic to Chris. But essentially, I suppose the statement from Rebecca to regulate DeFi as critical infrastructure is interesting in that sense that critical infrastructure also comes with a lot of added regulation on top of it, and that then would. So currently, I suppose, so DeFi, if we look at it like from a European perspective, we do see that, yes, if it's fully decentralized, it is not regulated, because regulated can only be legal persons or companies and so on, and this is why it's not complete. This is why then, if it would really be truly decentralized, it would fall outside. Now, most of, and we will for sure discuss this more also here, most of like decentralized, different types of applications, DEXs and so on, has some component that could be classified as centralized, which would then like get regulation, like be regulated, both on the back end and on the front end through different types of regulations or requirements. But also, yeah, therefore, like to then state that, okay, like DeFi could be regulated as a critical infrastructure is interesting because then we don't really move away from regulating DeFi. We're potentially regulating DeFi even more, but also that is, which has been sort of a point raised also from people that criticizes this this statement or this proposal by Rebecca, is that if you then have critical infrastructure, that means that you also need to have quite a lot of money to be able to meet requirements from a regulatory point of view that critical infrastructure comes with.
And it ultimately goes back to the question, what is actually decentralized, right? So the same issue that applies in the financial regulatory world, that it's difficult to actually regulate something that is truly decentralized, applies also in that regard, I think. And so where can we actually draw the line? What differentiates a mere technical infrastructure from a crypto service? Chris, do you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one that's really occupied regulators, both in the US and in Europe. From a European perspective, I would start with the most recent report from the Dutch financial regulator, the FSA, where they went to great length to set out how they would analyze whether or not a service or service provider is truly decentralized. They put a lot of weight on both technical decentralization, i.e. smart contracts that cannot be altered, edited, touched by anybody, as well as managerial decentralization, so no central entity that is guiding the protocol. I think more on the US side, the analysis tends to come down to intermediaries. As Rebecca was saying, if there's no intermediary, it's very hard to regulate. But the reality is, in a lot of DeFi providers, there is an intermediary, or at least an entity that the regulator thinks they can hook onto. You've seen it in Uniswap with the CFTC recently. You've seen it in Tornado Cash. It's always the fact that somebody is providing a certain interface to an otherwise decentralized service that gives the regulator a way in. And in the European perspective, I think they're wrestling with similar considerations as to what should truly constitute decentralization in this context.
Actually, one addition, it was not the Dutch regulator, it was the Danish regulator who made that report.
My mistake.
Really interesting read, I can definitely say. Regarding the regulation, so I think, I always ask myself, that's maybe because I'm a tech guy, so what are the layers that we have? And in the end, of course, there's let's say the pure infrastructure, so the nodes, the validators, and kind of the economics of a blockchain. How much regulation should we have here? From my point of view, none, because it's just providing a technical infrastructure. The internet per se also doesn't have regulation. It's just the processing of transactions and forwarding IP packages. If regulation happens at that level, we're talking about internet in China, for example, right? And I think we all agree that this kind of dealing with regulation on a technical level doesn't make sense and also violates with our European values. So then there's the next layer. That's in the end then the offering of a service. And from my point of view, when also looking at DeFi, so if it's about a decentralized exchange or other services, it's to some extent providing a financial service. And I think that's there it starts to become interesting whether if I trade on a decentralized exchange or on a centralized exchange, how much this differentiates and comes with different regulation, different obligations and so on. And maybe we can deep dive on this also later on the panel, because I think there's also like a lot of blacks and whites and gray in between, and then there's the front end. Yeah, so who's providing or who's giving the access to a certain service? And I think that is also what the FSA in Denmark pointed out, that there's like an interface. So for example, if I kind of enable a user to make a trade on a centralized exchange or connect with a DEX aggregator, that it is almost the same kind of investment brokerage when you do this with a centralized infrastructure. For example, like an exchange that's doing proprietary trading or something like this. And I think that's so we had also some touch points with BaFin back in the days that also has the same opinion. And therefore I have the impression that nowadays things really start to get sorted out. So especially the front ends somehow have a relationship with regulation, so that needs to be defined. But also when it comes to the protocols offering the services, I think this there's one particular point that I want to also highlight, and then you can jump in, because I think many arguments from DeFi developers is we're doing open source code development, and there's like freedom of speech and so on and so forth. And I always compare it with kind of the development of Linux. Linux is also open source software development, and there were some people building code for a web service and so on. This is somewhere people can take it, and then they instantiate it, so it's running in memory, and then it's kind of like provided as a service. And when my server gets hacked and is used for criminal stuff, then also the hoster is responsible for this. And I think this is where the argumentation, at least like for DeFi, from my point of view, starts to break, because if I take code, I instantiate it in the whatever EVM, and then it's running there. So I think there's definitely some sort of responsibility that the developers have, and I think that needs to be defined, because otherwise it can also be pretty dangerous for the developers if they're responsible and eventually have class actions and so on.
But is it actually the developers or the person that instantiates, like runs the code? I always thought it's more the one that actually use and run and that's also the direction that we see with ESMA now saying that this front running, right, MEV, that this might at least fall under the disclosure rules, right? So I thought that was an interesting step. That was the first time I actually saw something from the regulators saying also those who run a validator are responsible to a certain extent and are not supposed, for example, to front run.
Yeah, so I would definitely agree. So especially, so developing code is nothing that should be regulated. It's just like you write it, and if it's in the repo, it doesn't kind of have like any effect on users and businesses and so on. But if you take that code and you let it run somewhere, so then this is definitely an active step. And from my point of view, this comes with some responsibility that needs to be defined.
So the Data Act, I think it's currently now the one that says that if you have software, if you have open source code and you take that open source code and then you build it into, like you use your open source code in a product that you build for commercial purposes, then you are responsible also for that open source code, like how it's used, and you're only not responsible for that open source code if it's like in a foundation, like if it's kind of for non-profit use there. So that's also like really interesting because it puts even more responsibility on the developers and how the product is used and Tornado Cash and whatnot. So.
All right, Marius, you stand a little bit for the side of the TradFi, looking into DeFi. What is your experience with TradFi players?
Yeah, well, as a management consultant, our largest clients are highly regulated, large asset managers and banks, So from that perspective, my experience is that the closer you actually move the product towards launch, towards go live, the less like DeFi is left in it, And why is that the case? I think so. I think like the pure DeFi idea is somewhat under pressure, I would say, from the regulators, but also from the traditional finance companies that have found a way to apply the technology in a way that they're still in it, but also from the end customers, because if you look at the end customers of banks and asset managers, of course there are a certain portion of Bitcoin enthusiasts, of course. But you also have more broader, more mainstream end customer pools. And for those kind of customers, centralized, well-known financial institutions still provide value to them. They respect them. You know, they simply trust them, and they like it. You know, and that's why the companies that provide services to them, in that case, I'm talking about large asset managers and banks, highly regulated companies. They also like it. They kind of embrace this idea, just like most end customers embrace the idea that it's, have a fully regulated stamp on it. It's a highly regulated environment. And this helps those companies in their sales, and it also helps them actually taking out a little risk in their business models. So, and I think that's kind of interesting. Maybe if I add one more thing, I had like three months ago, I held a guest lecture at the TUM, invited from Professor Momtatz, and I talked about DLT-based business models, banks and asset managers. And when I was done, hands were raised by the students, and they said, "Well, Marius, thanks a lot for your insights, but if I look at these business models and if I look at this value chain, where's DeFi? Where's DeFi? I can't see it. We have this great technology that can decentralize everything, but if I look at these business models and this value chain, where is it?" And they're kind of a depressed notion with it, and I told them, well, if you look at it from a pure DeFi lens, yes, it's probably a disappointment, and you might have the impression that nothing much has changed. But if you take a closer look, I do think that we see, even in those business models, a narrowing of the financial intermediation chain. Talk about clearing, talk about settlement, for example. And you also see real efficiency and cost savings potential. And looking at the competition in banking, especially in Germany, there's a lot of the competition. So I do think that it is realistic for those cost and efficiency potentials to actually be passed on to the end consumer, and that would actually create benefit for all.
Adding on Marius' points. So also when I started really thinking about how could DeFi be regulated and kind of like digging into this topic a few years back, I was starting kind of with the point, I think that like the minimum regulation that you could have, and like leaving all the nitty gritty and whatever hundreds of pages like of rule sets and so on aside, I think the minimum set of regulation that you could have is just to know who's liable. Yeah, because when a customer, like an end customer or institutional customer, starts the journey and uses something, so for example like a protocol, and then there's like a bug in there or it gets hacked and so on, at the moment kind of the financial consequences are completely with the user. So in the end, and it's like, okay, you need to know what you're doing and so on. Okay, it's nice, so don't put all your money in there. Okay, also nice, but still kind of like usually in, let's say, traditional business making, you would know, okay, there's a company that sits in Germany or sits in France or sits in Argentina or somewhere, and you could at least try to go in front of court and kind of find out whether you can make a claim and something like that, and kind of like fight for your right, kind of because it was not your mistake that something broke. And I think that's already like this first level, and I kind of came to that idea because also some of our friends like in the German legal tech community mentioned like that also like the BGB, like the civil law is like also some sort of regulation, so how people work together, and it's like a very universal one. In Germany it's 100+ year old, and in the end, so I also came to the conclusion, so if there would be some sort of like legal entity that could be defined. So it could be, so I called it a digital society based on tokens. Yeah, so in German it would be a Genossenschaft on token basis.
Co-op.
Yeah, so a way cooperation. So that cooperative. Sorry. That because in the end you could become kind of shareholder or stakeholder like any minute when you hold the token, but then you also have some liability with it. So if you vote for something and there's like a consequence and so on, I think we somehow need to deal with this liability thing, because then afterwards we can talk about financial regulation and how to prevent front running and how the financial service should be constituted, that it's comparable with like TradFi, or even also standing out like as a new form of a financial service. But I think this liability question, I think DeFi won't ever hit the masses, so that every human being on the world is using it. So if this liability question is not solved.
Can I respond to that? Sure. I think the liability question is a great point, because it's one of the key points around MEV and other questions about DeFi as well. And it's intention with the nature of DeFi, because if there's an entity that's somehow liable for this mistake, you then have an entity that you can regulate. It's not truly decentralized anymore. As you very well pointed out, the systems tend towards centralization to answer these sorts of questions. You can look at other industries to find a model here. For instance, you could put a tax on every coin transaction and put it into a centralized fund. And okay, we use this money to make people whole. You can try to find other creative solutions that involve creating a pot of money, some sort of insurance concept to make people whole. But I think it's a very, very tough question to answer. And my feeling is that if you take the Danish guidance to its logical conclusion, you're essentially looking at doomsday smart contracts that cannot be touched or edited by anybody, that are not under anybody's control. They are in fact decentralized. They run without change forever. But like you said, there's nobody to talk to when things go wrong. And this, from a customer standpoint, at least from a mass customer standpoint, is quite unattractive, I think.
But nevertheless, I mean, the whole idea behind DeFi is that people, act within their own risk, right, and handling things on their own. And I completely agree that this will never reach mass adoption, right? Because I think all of us, we already lost some coins here and there, right? Because we were not that cautious. But nevertheless, I think there is a great potential for truly decentralized digital infrastructure, specifically when you look at it from the society angle, right? We are seeing a lot of threats, and I think a decentralized infrastructure makes us less vulnerable. So I think we should start thinking about, actually supporting and professionally building these things.
Yes, that's for sure. And but I really think that there's like it's a zeitgeist topic for sure. But I think also the crypto bubble to some extent is like a little bit like lying to themselves. I would maybe call it like that, because so talking about decentralization and all the like ethos behind it, and kind of independent systems and so on and so forth, but at the same time kind of there's like token distributions and there's incentives that are aligned into a certain direction, and then whatever earning like from the protocol fees and so on and so forth. And I think also the community is often arguing with building protocols like in the internet era, right? So HTTP, IMAP and so on, but who benefits from the IMAP protocol? So who benefits from HTTP? Do I have to pay somebody with every HTTP transaction that I do? No, I don't. And so in the end, so kind of I think what changed now, like with DeFi, is that there's at least like monetary incentives behind, and then also like investors putting money into this. And I think so if we would kind of like roll back, and there would be whatever like a blockchain that's owned by everyone, like by every human being. Everyone has a stake in this, and it's like really fully decentralized, as kind of every human, every machine kind of like has like tokens in it. So I think then also the whole discussion would be different, yeah. And I think this is a little bit this crucial point. And I think when discussing it, I know so I have kind of like two hearts in my body, because on the one hand I love the technology and I see all the potential, and working in the industry since 2016 as well, so I've seen a lot. But on the other side, we really need to talk about like every argument and not kind of ignoring some of them.
And just one quick addition, because that's why I liked your analogy so much. Because if you're at the layer of pure tech. At the pure tech layer, I think DeFi is much more free, and it must be more than just a niche, But if you move it up the layers, basically to the layer where the customer is there and is interacting basically with the product. I think that's where the boundaries are really setting in.
So if I can just sort of try to translate, Peter, what you said. So basically, if I understand you well, then your argument is that on the infrastructure level, where we have like somebody building like a protocol, take whatever, Ethereum, Polkadot, you name it, then that's sort of cool or good, I suppose, that's not too regulated because quote unquote nobody makes money there. So you would regulate, like, in simple terms, basically, if I understand what you're saying, it's like, okay, it's more justified, or maybe justified is too harsh of a word, but in any case, like, we should start regulated at the point where somebody actually makes money, and not, if you take that internet infrastructure example, like, you basically just build out the system. And then when you start building something on top because even in DEXs, somebody does make money there, like, like Uniswap and whatever, there's always like a small fee. So somebody like wins. Yeah, like somebody always like makes money there. So therefore, it would be like kind of okay that even that DEX gets regulated at some point because there is somebody behind it making money.
That's one of the criteria that BaFin had set up, right? So as soon as somebody is taking out money, then it will presumably not be regarded as fully decentralized anymore. But that's, I know we had, discussion about decentralization before, and I just want to mention, I completely agree that, the crypto industry is often lying to itself, right? Back in the days, everything was called decentralized, although it was not decentralized at all. It might run on a decentralized, protocol layer, if it's on Ethereum, for example, but, the smart contract nevertheless was fully under control. And you had a good laugh when we had our prep call when I said, there is a name for it, and that's Dino, right? It's decentralized in name only. That is a very common feature, I think, right?
Yeah, exactly. And but I really think it's important to think also in these layers because the infrastructure. So I think it's also okay to earn money when validating transactions and so on and so forth because it's a service. Yeah, so you're paying your servers, you're getting hardware, you have like electricity costs and so on. So that's like a service you provide to others. But is it like a regulated service? I would say no, because you could have like gaming networks on Ethereum and so on and so forth. So I think this is just like with the internet, I can operate a router and it forwards transactions. But let me come to the point. I think the regulation should happen on the app level. Yes. Yeah. So if this is like the DEX already, or if this is the mobile application that I'm using, or the interface that I'm using, or if it's actually both, kind of like to some extent. I think that needs to be defined. But I think I would keep it out of the infrastructure. And I make another example that I also once used in the Bundestag debate, because. Of course, so there's like we have like huge problems like with whatever pornography and like in the wrong areas and so on and so forth. But nobody had the idea so far to go to Seagate and all these hard drive producers to tell them, hey, you need to implement a filter in the hardware already to kind of like to avoid certain things. Yeah, and therefore, so I think, of course, there's like unwanted. Like behavior of people and like criminal activity and so on, and we want to block it. But I think we should try to do this on the application level or at the interface level, but not at the technical infrastructure.
Just very briefly, I think you're absolutely right. Running a validator node is a service. That means maybe not the financial regulatory stuff, and MiCAR applies, but certainly GDPR and all the other stuff that's out there, right? So I think there is maybe not any layer which is completely unregulated. It might be differently regulated.
That is absolutely true, but I do think that regulators and politicians are already acting and thinking that way. Yes, it's not completely unregulated in the tech layer, but you do see the bulk of the regulation towards the more towards services and towards the touch point between end customer and technology.
And it shouldn't be underestimated how effective this regulation can be. I think the example of the internet from the 90s is a very good one, because you did have efforts at the hardware layer, particularly around encryption, to install backdoors and things like this. So there is some precedent for this sort of activity. But at the end of the day, it turned out not really to matter, because the protocols themselves may remain relatively free, but we access the internet now through 5 or 6 large service providers. And so long as you can effectively control those service providers, you control the underlying protocols, at least enough to make the sort of difference you want to. And here the question is quite interesting, I think, because you see the initial enforcement efforts going towards the interface providers. And for me, it's a bit of an open question whether or not the protocols themselves will remain functionally open or functionally decentralized enough to achieve what I think is the initial goal of a more free and open financial system.
Maybe to also add another aspect of regulation to the discussion, because so also when I got first time invited to Ministry of Finance for comments on DeFi, I was already mentioning so in Germany there's actually a compliance regulation in finance which is called BAIT, betriebliche Anforderungen an die IT, so which means minimum technical requirements for running IT in a regulated company, and so in the end, so this, as finance has always been provided by centralized companies, it's BAT was fully written with a centralized pen in the kind of, okay, you have your data center, you can let the auditors in, they can check the technical organizational measurements and so on and so forth, and then you can comply with this thing. And now there's the harmonization in Europe, so with DORA, Digital Operations Resilience Act, where I would really say, even with BAT, but also with DORA, it's almost impossible to run decentralized infrastructure with this, because it's written with the centralized idea, so that I have counterparties, that I have central roles that are maintained by somebody, and so on and so forth. And I think also EU regulation really tried to be technology agnostic in terms of, okay, so they don't write into the law that you have to use whatever Rust or Java as a programming language. But in the end, the technical architecture, so being decentralized, relying on a network that you don't have under full control, where you share infrastructure, where you have multi-tenancy in a technical sense, and maintaining it with others together. So this is something new, which is not reflected in laws yet, because they're always viewed from the centralized perspective. And I think that will become, that's at least my hunch for the next few years, a real hustle also for mass adoption, because when real regulated applications run on this infrastructure, it will become really hard to comply with these rule books.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the regulation will ultimately change and go down to the single service provider, right? Because a computer is always run by somebody. It never runs on its own, right? So currently, we are still building the regulation in a way as if there was one running the whole thing, right? We didn't adopt it to the fact that there could be, multiples doing the same stuff at the same time with no single person having the full control.
And I think the key word is principle-based regulation. And I think also many regulators, also people when you talk to people at BaFin, so they're also saying yeah, we need to have principle-based regulation. So which is great, because in the end, to make one example, if also BAT, DORA are about resilient systems. So which in the end means business continuity management. So my servers are running all the time. I have always access to the data, blah 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 blah. So that really makes sure that that things go on forever. So there's when you have your own data center, there's certain strategies to make this sure, whatever AWS availability zones or multiple data centers in sync and something like this. But you could also achieve the same goal, like resilience, running forever, also with decentralized system like Ethereum or Solana. Yeah, and so there's always then consequences that derive out of that, and so I'm pretty much promoting for a long while now, so that this principle-based regulation needs to be implemented in a proper way. So where you really come from, okay, what do you want to achieve? And there's different technical architectures that could deliver to that goal, and then you could kind of define the guidelines around that. But I think that, so at least from my perspective, like in public regulation, at least on the European level, this has never been tried.
Okay, so I think we are coming to the end. I would like to invite all the speakers for like a quick last sentence. You know, what did you actually recognize how DeFi shifted already through the regulation that we were seeing coming up during the past years? And after that, we still have time for a little bit of Q&A, so, you know, get prepared. Yeah, Joanna, kick it off. So what did you recognize?
I think, recognizing that the regulation, or that we went from sort of not having too much regulation, or like, maybe I should rather say, like, in the last years with DORA, with the Data Act, with also MiCAR, like, we are regulating the tech from a lot of different angles, which is definitely like impacting the type of infrastructure you can build.
I would think quite practically in my own practice and working with clients is to say that you can no longer just put an interface on top of a decentralized protocol and say we're somehow free of regulation. That world has gone by. You see the changes both in the US and in the EU. And I think it's a lot tougher for companies or service providers that want to offer decentralized services to figure out now what they can and can't do. They have to take, unfortunately, a hard look at various jurisdictions and various regulations and see if their decentralized services are really decentralized enough to earn the name.
So I also think it's now really about the time also for also builders in the space to wake up and kind of like join the conversations, because I think there's still that opportunity to really kind of like with the technical infrastructure and all its abilities to really create a new system, so how financial services are offered and assets are encoded and whatever or persisted and transferred. But yeah, so I think it's really about like taking 2 steps out of the comfort zone, like on the DeFi protocol side, eventually also on the regulator side, on the lawmaker side, and so on, and starting the discussions, because I think we need to end up with this principle-based regulation based on kind of like all facts, 360-degree view on everything, being super transparent. And I think at least as long as the community is not taking an active role in those conversations, the rules will be made without them. And I think then we definitely don't get the rules that are acceptable for us, for the technology, and kind of for the vision of the financial system that we have.
Well, I think I would close it by saying that it's important to find the kind of regulation that still enables innovation, but at the same time enables some minimum form of trust and security.
Yeah, and coming back to what you just said, it's really difficult to find out, you know, in which jurisdiction to start and to understand how all these different things work. I did a post this morning about a comparison between, you know, the very favorite jurisdictions in Europe, Estonia, Lithuania, and Czech Republic, compared to Bulgaria. And I think, you know, crowdsourcing this knowledge for everybody in a transparent manner, that's maybe a little bit that we legal people should take on our side. So by that, opening up, do you have any questions to one or another panelist here?
Does this work? Yes. Amazing. You have a question? Yes. Maybe keep it brief because we only have
one
like 2-3
hand in
minutes.
the dark.
Hello. I have a question for Peter. There are discussions about many upcoming technologies, and the discussion about regulations usually come up to at the end that big companies are asking for so high regulations that they are the only ones who are able to enter the market, so that small tech or developers are not like able to develop anything practically because they don't have the resource to pay, let's say, like, I don't know, like consultants and everything, or I don't know, some legal resources. So do you think DeFi is also in a similar landscape that only big companies can enter the market, or do you think there's still opportunities?
That's a good question. So I personally think I must say that I feel a bit like less frightened of like regulation than I think many other people are. So I think if you at least starting with like IT compliance. So if you read DORA, if you read BAIT and all these documents, so if you're like a developer that really like takes care for quality, you would say like, if you have unlimited time to build like the perfect system with like proper role right management and substitutes, and so if whatever the one developer is not there anymore, so all knowledge is perfectly transferred, documented somewhere, so then you're already 99% compliant with BAIT and DORA, I would say. Yeah, so because there's not so much nonsense in there, so it's really just about like setting like a high level for quality for the organization. And therefore I think the opportunity with like DeFi and especially teams that start something regulated right now is that you can, if you build it up from the beginning, it's less costly than if whatever Deutsche Bank needs to migrate to like a new regulation and implement it in all processes. And therefore, so I think that's that part. So, and also as DeFi is a lot about automation, yeah, so taking autonomous decisions, readjusting prices, like lending rates and so on are automatically calculated. Everything is written in smart contracts. All processes of delivering a financial service to somebody is in software. I think that's also a really good prerequisite for being regulated, because in the end, lots of regulation is always about like the user or the employee who is delivering it, who's making sure that there's no manipulation and so on and so forth. But if everything is baked into software, you have kind of compliance and code. And again, so this can be much more cost effective than any big corporation can ever be. And that's the opportunity with DeFi and regulation.
Could I speak to this question? I would just add from a practical standpoint, in the last 6 months or so, I've worked with several clients at various regulators who are in the process of applying for CASP registration. And my take on this process is that either by design or by, let's say, unintended side effect, it is actually quite hard for small new teams to envision going through a CASP process, to have the compliance and legal resources and the team ready, even if you already don't have permission to operate, is very, very difficult. It requires having sufficient funds to enable you to do that. And for DeFi, I do think it's great if everything can be put into software, right? Can be put into smart contracts and remove the reliance on teams. I think what's going to be tricky for builders in the coming, let's say, 6 to 12 months, 18 months, is figuring out how far this MiCAR regulation will reach into the world of DeFi. If you take your smart contract compliance-enabled application to the regulator in Austria or BaFin here, and they say, that's great, but where's your compliance team? And you say, what compliance team? And they say, come back again when you have 5 people on staff. This makes it very, very tough for people to build, and unfortunately quashes a lot of innovation that would be quite helpful to the marketplace here. It shouldn't just be Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank and a handful of other large financial institutions, plus 2 or 3 very well-funded startups that are able to take advantage of these opportunities. It needs to be broader, and my own feeling is that it is a tough balance to find, and that regulators are going a bit too hard on the stricter side rather than the easier side.
Yeah, would agree. Another question.
We're a bit short on time, actually, to be honest. Sorry for that.
Right. Then meet us outside.
Just final question, maybe ask the same to other people as well. How can people reach you without having to cause billables or something?
Well, actually, interesting thing. I had initiated a couple of years ago an open office. So once a month, we would open our doors and say, you know, whoever want to come, you just need to be prepared that others are listening when more than one person is coming. But, you know, we're giving like 1 hour per month to the community. And we started to organize it in a way that people needed to actually let us know that they come, because we said not more than 5, because it doesn't make any sense. Unfortunately, I must say, after a while, people filled in their name, reserved their spot, and didn't show up. So after a couple of months, we actually stopped with that. But now I'm in discussion with the Bundesblock again to reintroduce this idea of open office so that the community can actually come and ask some initial questions. So.
Awesome, thanks. Sounds like a good initiative. Yeah, thanks for fitting that panel and also very interesting insights from my point of view. So big round of applause, please, for our panelists.
Thank you.